Well, the first battle of the war was fought just about 20 miles from Washington, D.C. at a place called Manassas Junction. July 21st. We call it the Battle of Bull Run. The South generally named battles after towns or something like that, whereas the North named them after streams and rivers and kind of natural landmarks, so to speak. Now, the more affluent in Washington thought that this was going to be the first and last battle of the Civil War. So they had their domestic help pack their lunch baskets, and the liverymen prepared the coaches that drove them over to watch the first battle of the war and only battle unfold. And of course, they were the first ones retreating back to Washington, D.C. And of course, the Union troops that participated in that battle weren't so fortunate, because even the wounded had to walk the 20-mile path to Washington. No ambulances to even convey them from the field of battle. And there were main regiments that fought at the first battle of Bull Run under the command of Colonel Oliver Otis Howard from Leeds, Maine. He commanded a brigade that consisted of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Infantry Regiment, Maine Infantry Regiment, and the 2nd Vermont Infantry Regiment. And they pretty much held their ground, but General Irwin McDowell, he just didn't command very effectively. And of course, by the time the day was coming to an end, the Union troops were retreating from the field of battle. And one of the last regiments to retreat was the 2nd Maine Infantry Regiment, a 2-year regiment. And they suffered quite a few casualties. Quite a few of them were taken prisoner of war because their assignment was to try to provide enough protection for the other Union troops to retreat from the field. Well, that opened the eyes up to the North. The South was a stronger force to be reckoned with than initially considered. Lincoln, of course, realizes he needs to put out a call for more volunteers. So he put out a call for another 300,000. Under that next call of Lincoln, Maine was allocated 4 regiments of infantry: 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th. Once those 4 regiments had been filled with their complement of men, there was still enough volunteers left over for another regiment. So Governor Israel Washburn, on his own, took the leftovers that came from all over the state and organized the 20th Maine Infantry Regiment. And I had the honor of being appointed Lieutenant Colonel of that regiment. I must confess, I did something a little sneaky, so to speak. Because when I had been appointed chair of modern languages at Bowdoin College, with that appointment, I could take a 2-year sabbatical leave at my choosing to further my studies. But when I learned that the 20th Maine was being organized, I took my 2-year leave. Not to pursue further studies, but to become a member of the 20th Maine Infantry Regiment. And Governor Washburn appointed me as a lieutenant colonel. And that reminds me, another individual by the name of Ulysses S. Grant, who had been asked to resign from the Army after the Mexican War when he was stationed north of San Francisco. He had developed a reputation for drinking too much. And he submitted his letter of resignation to the Secretary of War, Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis. Well, of course, when the war came and volunteers, he volunteered, but he was hoping he was going to get his commission back with the regular army. That didn't come. He was given a commission as a colonel to command an Ohio regiment. And guess who was one of the best friends of President Lincoln? Was Israel Washburn, a congressman from Ohio. And so he petitioned Lincoln to give a commission in the regular army to General Grant, and he was appointed a brigadier general. If that hadn't happened, we probably never would have heard of General Ulysses S. Grant. That's another one of those interesting stories. Now, Lincoln also appointed another general to command an army of over 100,000 men that was being organized. That 100,000 came from that 300,000 call following the Battle of Bull Run. In meeting with the president, who obviously is the commander-in-chief, the president had his strategic plan for continuing the war. McClellan's was entirely different. But the president gave in and let McClellan have his way. And this is basically what McClellan's plan was. He was going to march that, well, he wasn't going to march them, he was going to put them on boats, take them down the Potomac River, down to the tip of the Virginia Peninsula, and then march them on to Richmond and capture the Confederate capital. That was his plan. So that plan got underway in the spring of 1862. McClellan, very cautious, and he did not prevail in his attempt to capture the capital city of the Confederacy, and had to retreat. Oh, by the way, the head of his spy agency was Mr. Allen Pinkerton, the detective, and Mr. Pinkerton kept sending him these reports of the Union troops thing, and finally McClellan, when he added these all up, the Confederates had 200,000 men defending Richmond. So McClellan, of course, wired the president, said, I need another 30 or 40,000 men. And the president replied, number one, I don't dare to free up that many men guarding Washington, but number two, if I sent you 40,000 men, day after tomorrow you'd want another 40,000 men. That's the president's reply. So the battle opened up for Richmond in April, went on through June, into July, and finally, of course, McClellan, under tremendous pressure, begins to retreat back to his gunboats. Now, another interesting occurrence. During that battle, the commanding officer of the Confederate forces was wounded. And guess who took his place? General Robert E. Lee. And after Robert E. Lee took over command, he renamed the Army of Northern Virginia. Now, for about 3 weeks, General Lee had to decide what is going to be his strategy. Now, there were so many Union troops now in lower Virginia, how am I going to get these troops out of here? If I march north, those Union troops are going to have to march north as well. Number two, I think I will take my army into Northern Territory, Maryland. Yeah, I'm going to march into Maryland. Oh, you realize that the Maryland legislature was very sympathetic with the Southern cause. And Lee felt if he could gain a victory in Maryland, the Maryland legislature would vote to secede from the Union and join the Confederates. Of course, he didn't know what Abraham Lincoln had already done to prevent that from happening. Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus, had all of the members of the Maryland legislature rounded up and put in prison. Lee also thought that if he gained a victory in Maryland, England might recognize the Confederacy as a sovereign nation, supply them with their needed military supplies and so forth. Lincoln was way ahead of him. Lincoln sent 2 ambassadors to England to meet with Parliament with orders to tell Parliament that if they recognized the Confederacy, he would declare war on England. And the Russian ambassador, who happened to be there, and said, by the way, if Lincoln declares war on England, Russia will be an ally and declare war on England as well. Lincoln was way ahead in his kind of thinking. The battle unfolded in September 17th. The 2 armies would meet at the village in Maryland called Sharpsburg. The Union would call it the Battle of Antietam Creek. That's the river that flows through it. Again, McClellan was very cautious. I don't want to sound critical of General McClellan. What pained McClellan was the casualties of his men. He loved his men so much that it pained him to know he would have to suffer casualties when the enemy was engaged. Now, I'll just tell you this story. The 20th Maine was assigned to the 5th Corps of the Army of the Potomac. We didn't participate in the battle because McClellan held the whole 5th Corps in reserve. That was another mistake. Even when he had Lee finally pressured and Lee was retreating, rather than unleashing the 5th Corps, he failed to do so, which gave Lee the opportunity to cross across the Potomac River back into Virginia. But I just wanted to share this little story with you. Of course, we all went off to war, you know, with the ideas of heroes in our heads, you know. But just the day before the Battle of Antietam, there was fighting in a vicinity called South Mountain. And as the 20th Maine was marching down one of the roads, I happened to observe Confederate prisoners marching in the opposite direction. And as I looked off the road over to the right, I saw a Confederate soldier crouched down, you know, with his back against a tree. And I said, this is my opportunity to see my first enemy face to face. So I walked over. This individual was seated back to the tree, knees bent, with a copy of the New Testament in his hands. Head was down. So I looked down and I looked into his face, and I looked into the face of a 15-year-old boy. That was my enemy. This is what this war is about as well. I will never forget his face as long as I live. Never, never. Now, after Lee had retreated back across the river to Virginia, McClellan kept us there at Sharpsburg for another 3 weeks. And the president decided to visit, find out what's going on. He asked McClellan, he said, what are you still doing here with the army?